Equipment dealers, know your market inside and out with Fusible's dealership solutions. Do more with good data at fusible.com/thedirt. Hi everybody, welcome back to Equipment World. You're watching The Dirt. I'm your host Brian, and today we're here to talk about the new Cat 140. It is a different machine. They have redone a bunch of things and improved, and today we're going to hear about it from Eric with Caterpillar. Well, Eric, thank you so much for taking time to be on The Dirt today. I really appreciate it.
Hey, thanks for the invite and glad to be here.
Yeah, anytime, especially when we're here to talk about blades. That's one of my favorite pieces of equipment on the job site. It's kind of the pinnacle of most guys' careers when they finally get in the seat of one of these machines. And so on the note of that being the career piece that a lot of guys kind of work to get into, one of the topics of hot debate when it comes to graders specifically, and especially with your machines, is the controls. I know when you guys went to the joystick controls a while back, a lot of the old guys in the industry had an issue with that. Are you guys offering the piano keys these days, or is it still joystick only?
Great question. Absolutely. We are offering both. So we have that steering wheel and mechanical levers, also known as piano keys or the joysticks. And when it comes down to it, it's kind of like lots of other products in the industry, whether it's ISO or SAE when it comes to excavators, or two lever versus joystick on loaders, things like that. Same thing here. So we do offer that steering wheel and mechanical levers, also known as the piano keys, because those folks, what they're looking for is just that familiarity of those controls. They've had it since the H series or some previous series, and they want to continue. They feel very efficient with it. But one of the other reasons people really like those levers is they like the feel, because it's as old school as you can get. It's a lever to a rod right down to the valve. So as you are cutting and doing work, you feel forces through those levers because of, more pressure in the hydraulic system, so that what's going on. You see with your eyes, but you also are able to feel that with those lever controls. Now, obviously, we'll continue with the joysticks too. With joysticks, the people really like to sit back. They like that 78% reduction in hand and wrist movements that allow you to go left and right with the joystick for steering versus multiple turns with that steering wheel. They like that ability to have that different visibility out the cab because we have that angled cab. So the thing too to remember is a lot of folks ask when it comes to controls on the joysticks, hey, why are you floor mounting your joystick controls? And the reason we floor mount our joystick to the cab is because we're trying to get some of that feel that those lever folks are used to, because vibrations, feelings, things like that move up through the moldboard and through the circle and the drawbar up through the machine into the cab, and you're able to kind of feel some of that feedback via floor mounted control. So whether you choose steering wheel levers because, hey, that's what you're comfortable with, or joysticks, we try to provide that feeling for it. And the funny thing is talking with people, it's not one size fits all. I mean, obviously there's those that are one control or the other. There are mixed fleets out there. Some people are doing heavy bulk work and technology with, the joystick graders, and they may be doing some finish work with that steering wheel and lever machine just because of the feel differences or the preferences for the type of application that they're doing.
It is interesting. The grader is just one piece of equipment that within the last 5 or so, 10 years that you guys introduced joystick controls, there's kind of been this hot topic of debate about the mechanism by which you're operating with. But on other pieces of equipment here in the last 5 to 7 years, we've seen a lot of those go from regular mechanical controls to EH controls, and the same debate always happens. It's, I can't feel anything in my hands. I've lost so much of my ability. And really, my experience, I used to run loader on a pipe crew, and I had an old machine that had the regular mechanical controls, and then I got put into a machine with the new EH. And your initial gut is absolutely you've lost all of your feel, all of your finesse. But really, what happens if you kind of just take a step back and breathe for a second is you start to develop those skills and you start to get that feedback just from different areas. Because I did notice that I started to get my finesse back in that machine, but I wasn't getting feedback from the joystick anymore. I was starting to get it more from my chair, from feedback in the steering wheel. There's other ways you can get that feedback. And so I do feel like for a lot of these old school guys especially, they get so hung up in, I've lost everything, you can't, this thing's a piece of garbage, you just can't operate, that they don't ever really give it a shot to actually retrain themselves. And realistically, you're talking a couple of days, maybe a week, that you get that feel back and you start to get that feedback from other areas. And you're just as good as you were before. But I think it's just that mental hurdle of getting over that change, which, as we all know in our industry, no one likes change.
No, exactly. And that you bring up a great point. That's the thing. I mean, where you're putting the moldboard, where you're putting the circle, where you're articulating, those things haven't changed regardless of the control system. It's just how are we getting the machine to that setup so that you can do that task is the biggest thing that really has changed. I mean, we're not changing how we move dirt. We're just changing how to manipulate the machine to do what you need it to do.
Absolutely. You're not having to relearn how to operate from ground zero. You're just having to get feedback from different areas.
Yeah.
And also to another point that you made, there are a lot of guys that just swear by the old piano keys. But at the same time, I've ran them both ways, very limited. And I can imagine that doing this all day long, using individual fingers, versus having joysticks with very simple light touch clicks. I mean, talk about an anti-fatigue mechanism. I can imagine this would just get so exhausting over the course of a day versus those joysticks where everything's just at a fingertips reach. That's got to be so much easier on the hands.
No, I mean, absolutely. Let's look at a base grader. You're looking at a steering wheel and 8 levers and a transmission control. So you really have 4 different locations: left side of the levers, steering wheel, right side of the levers, and the transmission control. You're moving your hands left and right all day long, depending upon the type of application you're doing. We've incorporated all that onto these 2 joysticks, 3-axis joysticks, that allow the folks to be able to keep their fingers and hands on the controls. And you're absolutely right. I mean, a lot of people look at these joysticks and go, well, I wasn't raised with the gaming systems and things like that. But I mean, some of our biggest advocates haven't been just the young generation. It's actually been some of the older operators. We've heard stories from some of the older operators that have extended their careers. I talked to operators that went back to going bowling and doing things after hours because, you know what? They just feel less fatigued. I mean, you are holding your shoulders kind of in a more tight position and upper back with the levers. And it's a really great setup, but sitting back and just being able to relax has helped a lot of folks extend their careers greatly. In some terms, 5-10 years more than they thought maybe they would be able to handle it. So it is definitely something that makes life a lot easier for some operators.
That makes total sense. And I guess I've never really thought about the additional body fatigue, but it makes total sense. If you think about it, most of those piano key guys are very forward. They're looking down. The shoulders are engaged, upper body's engaged, versus with those joysticks, I mean, you're really getting comfortable in that. If you're going to pay a lot of money for a very comfortable seat in a machine, use it. Sit back in it, adjust the seat. That's what I always tell new operators is actually take the time to adjust that seat. Those suckers are expensive.
Yes.
This is going to be your office chair all day. Make it yours. But to be able to sit back with those joysticks now, total upper body relaxation, your shoulders are in a very relaxed position, you got armrests supporting them, and that's just overall, it's so much more ergonomic.
You talk to people about what a grader does, and typically they come up with 3 main applications. It's finished grade work, so it's coming in and doing the work just before the paver comes in, or after the motor grader goes, the compactor comes in and then they put down paving. The other one is you see a lot of them, especially in North America, there's rural roads that need to be maintained, so there's a lot of road maintenance. And then of course, as you move further north, there's snow removal. Those seems to be the 3 applications most people look at a grader. But graders do a really good job on slope work. They do really good at ditch work and cutting and laying out material. Articulation, if you need to articulate, obviously the big one is a lot of people use it for turning. But have you thought about utilizing that to, you got too much load on your moldboard, you can basically offload some of that load on that moldboard by articulating. Doing a flat bottom ditch, you're fully articulated, you're taking that 14-foot moldboard and suddenly you're making a 3-foot cut because you're able to utilize and manipulate that moldboard differently when you add articulation and things like that. So it's really just getting people in, getting them comfortable, and seeing what a motor grader can do and be thinking beyond just finish work, road maintenance, snow removal for applications.
So this is a little bit of a tangent, a little bit of a sidebar, but I do feel like the grader is one of those machines to where kind of getting in there and figuring it out doesn't really cut it. And I think we're seeing that on a lot of job sites. You have, I would say, probably the majority of operators that are in those machines are very skilled. They're very good at what they do, but they also have a very limited knowledge base because
Yes.
they were kind of thrown the ropes and said, hey, figure it out. And then you watch videos of some guys that really know how to run a grader. And like you're talking about, I mean, watching a skilled operator do slope work or ditch work with one of these machines is unbelievably impressive. I bet 80 to 90% of companies out there would never even think to utilize a grader for those applications.
Yes.
And to be honest, their operator probably couldn't use the grader in that application just because they simply don't know how. And
Yes.
so I do think the grader in particular is one of the machines that we just don't do nearly enough to train our operators. Even the old school guys that have all of this knowledge are really lacking to really fully utilize the machine.
Absolutely. I mean, and that's the thing. I mean, knowledge transfer, that was one of the challenges sometimes with the grader is the folks that were good operators, some want to share that information and be able to bring somebody else up to speed. A lot of them like to hold on to it because you know what? Let's be honest, they work their tails off to get where they're at. So they kind of, in a way want to hold on to that. But there are some things that are out there now. What we have is we have an application guide. We also have videos out there for certain little things to be able to just help improve an operator's confidence. So there are definitely a lot of great things that we offer as well as passionate blade hands have out there for people to learn.
Yeah, and I would encourage everyone in the industry, never stop learning. That's one of my big mottos in the industry is don't ever think you've reached the mountaintop of your skill level because
No.
you don't ever get there. There's always something new to learn. There's always some new skill that you can pick up from someone else by observing and watching. Kind of getting back to the new 140 though, machine control. What do you guys offer and what is standard on this machine? Am I able to get a bare bones grader? Or am I forced to kind of have some of that technology integrated on it?
But before we get into that, I want to take a second to tell you about the sponsor of this video.
Equipment dealers. Want an edge in today's market? Fusible provides the crucial sales data and market analysis you need to make smarter inventory and sales decisions. Imagine knowing exactly what's selling in your region, understanding emerging trends, and optimizing your stock to meet demand. With Fusible's flagship products like EDA data, you're not just reacting to the market, you're anticipating it. Get the advantage at fusible.com/thedirt.
What do you guys offer and what is standard on this machine? Am I able to get a bare bones grader or am I forced to kind of have some of that technology integrated on it?
What we do offer standard for everybody on a lever machine is the bubble gauge in the cab window. So, I mean, at a bare minimum, you have some grade system. It's just a simple little level meter with a degrees and percentage. So that is definitely part of the bare bones offering with no technology. It still has that bubble level. The next one up is just a simple IMU sensor or inertial measurement sensor that is a digital blade slope meter, giving you basically a digital readout of that bubble gauge that's in the cab. So if somebody wants to be able to just look at the display to kind of quickly glance and see what they have going on. And then once you get into that, you've got different levels. If you're in a scenario where, I want a grader, I'm just not sure about technology right now, but maybe later I'll add a 2D or 3D system. We do have a thing called CAT Grade ARO, attachment ready option, gives you the plug and play capability, gives you the wiring harnesses, the sensor mounts. It also provides you the blade mass brackets and a position sensing cylinder, moldboard cylinder. It just gives you great architecture to be able to add that in the future. So some people are wanting a grader and they've got a job that maybe doesn't require it. And then in the future, they do want, and we have that capability. And then we also on the lever machine now have what's called cross slope assist. Cross slope assist gives the ability for, and that's a 2D system, giving the operators the ability to either have it as an indicate because it's got 6 sensors on it. It's got pitch of the machine. It's got rotation of the moldboard. It's got blade slope. It's also got a drawbar sensor, a yoke sensor. That yoke sensor is when you center shift that drawbar circle and moldboard, those two lift cylinders still turn. So, when you center shift, a lot of people think it just goes straight to the left and right, but it actually has a slight curve or arcing pattern, and we need to capture that rotation. And then we have that position sensing cylinder. So the point of that is it allows you to be able to have an accurate system even when you center shift, but it's in an indicate, so the operator can use it and it's constantly reading out actual blade slope. Or, if they would like to, and they know, say they're working an oil field pad and it's a 0% slope, and they want to be able to dial that machine in, they can put 0% slope in, and then they choose which side is manual and which side's automatic. Typically, not always, people like to have the automatic side be their discharge side or the heel of the moldboard, and then they manually control the toe. And then what happens is they choose auto on the discharge or the heel side. They control the elevation of the manual side, and the machine controls the 0% slope in this case, or 2% slope, or whatever the case may be. As well as you can use that system with other sonics and other things as well. And then we now have as well on this lever machine an industry exclusive mastless 3D system. So, you see a lot of graders out there with those two masts on that moldboard, and they've been out there for decades, and that's just kind of the way it's been. We've had it on the joystick since 2020, but now on levers, we are taking those masts off. We're putting that infrastructure on the machine, those 6 sensors, plus these receivers for the antennas, the GNSS, or GPS receivers are on the machine. Now suddenly these operators are going out, they're using these motor graders with more applications because they're not worried about that mast. That mast is not going to catch a tree. It's not going to go into the cab and knock the cab glass out or bend the mast. It's integrated onto the machine. The other thing with the mastless system, whether it's a joystick or lever, setup time. The machine's ready, it's ready to go. You turn it on, it checks the system, and you go to work. Otherwise, when you have those masts, you typically have those high-priced receiver antennas on each mast. You're having to take them off at the end of the day, put them on. You're probably grading for another hour, maybe an hour and a half every day because there's no setup or takedown time. So that's kind of the value. So, Brian, you got no technology if you really just need a grader that's simple and straightforward, and that's what you're comfortable with, all the way up to a full mastless system. The operator focuses on the work, the task at hand, and not worry about what's going on with masks because they are not on that machine.
Yeah, not having the mask is huge. That's one of those things where I guess until you're really in the machine, you don't realize how limiting those things are as far as the ability to kind of pivot the turntable, bring that blade in a little closer to you. There's a lot of ways in which those masks really limit your range of motion that you wouldn't really think about until you're in one. So that's awesome. I did also want to say the 2D slope assist. You want to talk about taking fatigue off of the operator. For a lot of these county guys that are going around grading roads all day long, to be able to set that at a 2%, 3% slope, and all I got to do is worry about the crown of my road. I don't have to worry about the discharge side. Like you said, all I got to do is make sure that my moldboard's loaded with material, and I'm off to the races, and now every road's got a 2 to 3% cross slope on it. We don't have to worry about drainage issues, and it took far less effort and mental concentration than it used to.
And the other thing to realize when that happens is when you're at a true slope, when you go to put rematerial these roads, when they're consistent and, on slope, you're only putting a thin layer consistently across that entire surface. You're not having to fill in low areas, or there's other areas that don't need as much. So ultimately, you can actually take that material and make it go longer than you previously did if you have that consistency of that road.
Absolutely. There's a lot more benefits than even what you just recognize at the surface. It's a significant improvement to the old school way of doing it. So now I do have a question for you about all those sensors. So let's say we go with a fully decked out machine. How protected are those sensors? Are you guys seeing a lot of guys knocking those things off, damaging them? We all know that guys like to set that mold bar down and do a little back drag from time to time. Is that something where you're having issues, or are those sensors pretty well protected?
They're pretty well protected. I mean, obviously, if someone would try hard enough, I'm sure, or not be thinking about it, something could happen. But all those sensors are protected, especially if they're close to the dirt, are protected in a box. The wiring harnesses are come out. Those boxes, they're using, it looks like a hydraulic line and fitting. that's kind of hard mounted to that box so that we have rigidity in that wiring harness and basically that wiring harness runs through that, looks like a hydraulic hose, to just give some more structure and protection to those wiring harnesses, because it's really the wiring harnesses. It's not so much the sensors. The sensors are pretty, or the IMUs, or inertial measurement units, are pretty robust. It's really, pulling and tugging on wires that is probably the biggest challenge. So if you can get those pretty well protected, then you have a better chance of not having issues. And so we haven't had a whole lot of those issues. We do have customers and dealers come in and look at these machines and go, hey, you're going to have a hose rub here. You're going to have, a wire thing here. So they've already kind of helped us vet some of these possible areas where we could, including the sensors. So we're trying very hard to protect those, make life easy for the operator so that they have peace of mind even after aggressive application.
That's good to hear. At the end of the day, you can't fix stupid, and you can't fix someone who's going to abuse the equipment, but at least they're protected from everyday normal usage of the machine. So my final question is serviceability. What kind of improvements have you guys made to the 140 for just making it easier to work on?
We've got, depends on where you want to start here. We could start kind of in the front. I mean, from a serviceability standpoint, we still have our top adjust drawbar, circle, and moldboard, that allows you to shim up and keep that connection tight between the drawbar and circle. We also have the optional high performance circle that takes all the shims, the shoes, all the circle teeth, all that stuff that you may have experienced and needed to maintain in the past, and it's an excavator bearing. So between that circle and drawbar, basically all it is 3 grease fittings with a nested grease bank. All you do is, as you grease your ball studs and other locations on the machine, you just grease those quick locations and it takes care of everything. So that does reduce quite a bit of maintenance on the drawbar circle connection, which is obviously pretty critical for folks because, when you lift, you want that cutting edge to follow the lift command or the lower command. You don't want a whole lot of movement. So if we can take movement out of that and make life easier for folks and not have to reshim and do other things, that high performance circle will do that. Some other things we've done is those fuel tanks we have on our machines have been plastic and they've been great. We've had not a lot of issues with them, but what they did block is any potential issues that a technician may need to service underneath that cab. So what we've done with the 140 here is we've actually taken that front frame, that cavity that's right underneath the cab, and we've turned that into the fuel tank. With that is now suddenly all the hose routings and all the valve access and other things that you were struggling with before, it's more accessible on this machine. So it looks a lot more clean and open, as well as we've moved the pumps in the back engine compartment. Under the cab, they were kind of hard to get to. Now, when you get into the back of that engine compartment, you have accessibility to those pumps on the right and left-hand side. So moving that makes it quieter for the operators, but also makes serviceability better for the technicians as well. Something else we've done is a lot of these things are little things. So we're going to a contactless articulation cylinder. And what that allows is there's no rods, there's no major adjustments that are needed like previous. So that's just less things for an operator and a customer to worry about. We move those articulation cylinders outboard, easier accessibility. If there would happen to be, unfortunately, a leak or something else that you need to service, so you have greater accessibility to those. As well as, let's get into the engine compartment. We've basically redone that entire engine enclosure structure. Easier to use, handles to open and close the doors. Our previous ones were twist, and if they weren't adjusted, they would, not function quite as well as people would like, and they get frustrated. The other thing is when you opened one of those doors on the previous series machines, you were just opening basically that square that was the door. But what we've done is we've taken a little part of that top of that engine enclosure and added it to the door. So now when you open that door, not only are you opening the door to gain access, but you also have better topside access if you need to get to the top side of that engine or other components in that area. And then once you open those doors, we have no tools, lower panels that you pull out. So you have 4 doors and 4 panels, and you pretty much have frame to top of engine compartment access to any serviceability items that you need to get into that engine compartment, just making it a lot easier for technicians, whether they just happen to need a little bit more accessibility or they need to get batteries out or do things like that. we've done quite a bit. As well as the other thing we've done is we've moved filters up. Our transmission filter was down kind of in the dirt. We've moved that up to in your face and accessible, just because if we make things easier for technicians and for operators or whoever's doing the maintenance, the more likely it is that something's going to get done. We also have no tools to open the rear door. You need cooling access or access to all sides of the cooler. You have that rear door, you have accessibility between them, you have accessibility in the front. So if you do get into applications where there's a lot of debris, you have a standard reversing fan, but then you also have the ability to get into all these coolers from all sides to be able to clean out debris and do things like that. You know, if you look at our current machine, we had a after treatment fan on top of it. We had the pre-cleaner on top. From an operator perspective, when they looked out the rear window, there was a lot of clutter on top of that engine compartment. You know, it's been great and they've worked around it, but now all we have on that back of that engine compartment is just that stack. Everything else has been moved to some other location to make it cleaner and easier for operators to be able to see what's going on over the back of the machine. Other things we've also done is we've put a new rear frame on that machine, and now we're actually just bolting the ripper to it, so you don't have to worry about the tag links or adjustments and making sure things are tight and lined up properly. And some people do take rippers on and off. It's a lot easier to just bolt on a new ripper. So we're really trying to take care of the folks who are obviously making the decisions and paying the bills and lowering their costs. We're also looking at the operators. How can we make life easier for them? And definitely those technicians, because if they can get in, they got access to it, they can get service work done, then suddenly they're up and going faster, just making life easier for all three parties that are involved in maintaining, purchasing, and operating these machines.
Well, Eric, I appreciate your time and all the information on the new 140. I'm excited to see that roll into some new job sites.
No, absolutely. I highly encourage you all, if you want to talk nuts and bolts, you want to talk about history, you want to talk about the machines that we'll have at ConExpo, come look me up. I'm gladly spend some time and geek out over graders. You know, all my coworkers laugh all the time because they do see me starting to geek out and they sometimes have to bring me back down. So I look forward to seeing people at ConExpo and appreciate your time here today, Brian.
Well, thank you again for Eric joining us to talk about the new 140 and all of the improvements made. I can honestly say one of the most exciting things for me is the mastless moldboard. That is going to be a huge improvement to visibility, to workability of the machine, just an overall really great improvement. As always, I hope this helps you in your business. We'll catch you on the next episode of The Dirt.